Hello audience, Mr. Z here once again with yet another alternate history scenario for you. The British Empire. We all know how formidable it is, or rather was. Never really was the same after the 20th century, I think we could all agree. Oh, but what a display of strength it gave in the two great wars. However, as we've seen, no empire could survive the onslaught and brutality of a lifetime of war in the modern age. When bombs can level entire cities and a single gunner can wipe out an entire troop of soldiers, a titan of such size is brought tumbling down under its own weight. The people saw great famines, economic strife, and political instability and turmoil, both domestically and abroad. Chaos and terror gripped every corner of the globe, as the sides of war stacked almost equally every time. However, what if that weren't the case? Indeed, Britain was a formidable force, and many would attribute its role as pivotal to the defeat of Germany in both World War I and World War II. However, what if Britain were to shift the scales of the conflict from the very beginning by aligning itself with the Central Powers in World War I? You'd of course need to ask, why? Why would Britain do such a thing? But we seem to forget that just decades prior, it was France who would be Britain's primary adversary, and not Germany. Just as to the US, Britain was still the nation they'd fought to free themselves from, until their involvement in World War I seemingly wiped that memory away. So, yes, there is a way to keep the blood between France and Britain boiling, but how far back do we need to go? As it turns out, not too far. All we'd need to do is prevent the establishment of the Entente Cordiale, or the Cordial Agreements. See, Otto von Bismarck had, since the Franco-Prussian War, sought to isolate France from any major European allies. However, on account of how quickly Germany was growing as a European power, Britain instantly sought to ally with France and maintain the status quo on the European continent, rather than join the Triple Alliance with Germany. The issue was that France and Britain still had an icy relationship, and thus had to go through a series of cordial agreements before the alliance was struck. However, there are numerous opportunities for this to have gone sour, be it over Egypt in the late 1800s, as well as the rest of Africa, and especially during the Russo-Japanese War, when the two almost got dragged into the conflict, France having been allied to Russia, and Britain recently establishing the Anglo-Japanese alliance. This certainly could have gotten messy, but to avoid overcomplicating the matter, we'll just say that France and Britain maintained a distant relationship over colonial claims, and briefly combat each other during the Russo-Japanese War, reaffirming their animosity and drawing Britain over toward Germany and Austria, establishing the coalition forces, blocking France off from Russia, and evoking historic images of the Napoleonic War to boost coalition morale. Italy, of course, having its disagreements with Austria over land holdings, decides to leave the coalition to ally with a now more desperate France, promising them portions of Austrian land should war begin. Portugal, abiding by the old Anglo-Portuguese alliance, switches over to the coalition just as conflicts are sparked between Austria and Serbia, pulling Serbian allied Russia into the war, followed by Germany, and then France, and of course Britain. This war seems fairly clean-cut and requires little explanation. With British support, the French front is able to be rapidly breached, allowing for further German infiltration, while Austria and Bulgaria launch a united push into both Serbia and Russia. The Balkans would not last very long and would serve as a perfect launching-off point for coalition forces to begin invading southern Italy, while Germany and Britain crept down the French border, and the Russians succumbed to a combination of internal stressors, the coalition army, and cut supply routes. This ultimately leads to a coalition victory with these changes to national borders here. Germany acquires portions of France and select French colonies, as well as the northwesternmost coastline of Russia, including Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, while Finland becomes independent, and Austria, given the significant internal strife it was facing on account of the numerous ethnic groups within its borders, goes on to establish the United States of Austria, creating autonomous zones within its own borders to accommodate the Serbs, Italian, Slavs, and other ethnic groups who reside within it. Bulgaria and the just barely surviving Ottoman Empire partition Greece, while the Ottomans begin restructuring into a republic after losing southwestern territory to a number of rebel groups in the area. Britain acquires nearly all of French Africa, granting it access to a vast supply of resources and ensuring the British Empire keeps on kicking for decades to come. On account of the relative speed with which this war is won, Britain and Germany manage to emerge relatively unscathed, while Austria and the Ottoman Republic face minor economic hiccups, unlike France and Italy, who would see the worst of things. And while conflicts in Western Europe had ceased, the Russian Civil War still raged on, and saw the involvement of coalition forces to re-establish order by supporting the White Army. The coalition would already have a number of Austrian, Ottoman, and German soldiers stationed within Western Russia, while Finland and Ukraine lent their full support to pushing back the Bolsheviks. Japan would of course be dealing with a small red and green army presence in the Far East, and may use this as an excuse to occupy portions of Russian territory indefinitely. And while the Russian Red Army seemed to dwindle under the combined forces of the Coalition and White Army, right under their noses, a communistic presence would begin to rise within France and Italy, growing exponentially and gaining vast support for their promises of economic reform and revenge against the imperialistic aggressions of Britain and Germany, soon seeing the migration of many communists fleeing from Germany, Austria, and Russia to bolster their numbers. Back in the East, the final nail in the coffin for the Russian Red Army would come in the form of Baron Ungern von Sternberg, a pan-monarchist general who would have rallied tremendous support within Mongolia to join the White Army forces, wipe out the communists, and reinstate the Tsar. The remaining Bolsheviks would be driven out of Russia. However, back in France and Italy, the movement had assumed nearly full control, the coalition only being able to secure Brittany while the Franco-Italian Soviet state was established. Germany and Britain would attempt to invade the new communistic union, only to be met with guerrilla-style warfare and a border laced with traps. It would need to be set aside for the moment while coalition forces recovered from the long battle in Russia, which would be restructured with the aid of von Sternberg and the German government, dividing the easternmost regions of Russia into joint occupation zones by Britain and Germany for later reorganization and reconstruction on account of their lower population density and the possible existence of Bolshevik remnants within these areas. Brittany would be reintroduced into the British Empire and become a safe haven for many French fleeing the new communist government. As the years go by, so would the FISS, or Franco-Italian Soviet state, go on to consolidate authority, restructuring itself and begin influencing other states around it, just as economic crisis began shaking the United States of Austria and the Ottoman Empire, leaving the Balkans vulnerable to communist influence, as well as Spain, who would have been entering the prelude to their own civil war. This would begin a long period of skirmishes between Austria and the communist-backed rebel groups within their borders, leading Austria to eventually lose portions of their southwest of the Franco-Italian Union, who would go on to assimilate Spain and incorporate them into their borders, in essence recreating the geographic Roman Empire, but now with a communistic government. And that, I guess, is where I will end this scenario for now. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to let me know if you'd like to see a part 2 to this, like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more. Mr. Z, out.